would I treat a business partner that was not related to me in this way in front of my staff or around my staff?
Don't try to create a role for somebody just because they're family. They need to fit into that role, and that role needs to make sense, because you could end up damaging the agency because you're not putting people in the right role. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our podcast. Today, Bobby and I will be talking about benefits and challenges of working with siblings in an insurance agency.
Love some siblings.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I actually have thought about this. My brother and I are very, very, very driven. When we have a task to get done, we jump in, dive in, and get it done. So I was thinking, I was like, no, I would never want to work with my brother, because as kids, we fought all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But then I started to think about his work ethic, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. His work ethic is amazing. So yeah, I think we could work together. I don't know in what, and I don't know if I would want it to be an insurance agency, but I think I can work with my siblings. How do you feel about that?
Well, so I have kind of a bit of an interesting story. I didn't actually have siblings until later in life because I was adopted at a young age. And so, I grew up as an only child and very, helicopter mom as an adopted child, but I have pretty good work ethic. And I think some of that, there's the nature versus nurture theory around that. And I think that I met my siblings later in life, and now I actually live in Knoxville, Tennessee, where they are also close by, and we have really great, strong relationships later in our years. And I would absolutely run a business with my siblings because I think they are very similar to me. It's interesting. Our spouses will always tell us how much alike we are.
How alike you are, and then it kind of grows up.
Yeah, we're very alike, even though we didn't grow up in the same household with the same parents.
That's cool. I don't know. It must be something about our biological makeup and how that works. I recently found out I have an aunt that we didn't know we had, and she looks a lot like my grandmother, and she has a lot of our personality traits. So it's kind of cool. But I know Kelly's worked in a lot of agencies with siblings and spouses. I've actually worked with Kelly in an agency where there are 5 siblings working with the dad. And it can get messy, but it's also really, really cool. When I was growing up, my aunt had 5 kids, and hide and seek was like the best hide and seek ever. So I think growing up with siblings, I think it's a great opportunity. And I think working with your siblings, there's definitely some benefits. One of those benefits is trust. Siblings have deep understandings and familiarity, and it builds this foundation of trust that they just automatically have because they've grown up together. And it's great in a close working relationship because you don't have to worry about, them not trying to pursue success for the agency because you're all kind of headed for the same goal. And then there's also like a family legacy, like a long-term commitment. You all have the same long-term commitments to each other, and it can, contribute to dedication and perseverance in an insurance agency. The family legacy can also be a deterrent and be a challenge because if you have 5 siblings, who's going to take over? That can be very complicated and make for very hard challenges. I think what we need to realize is that is really far in the future, that legacy part of it. And when the parents are still involved, I think we have to start at the bottom and work our way up. And if we're focused too much on that future and the end and who's going to take over, I think we lose track of in between, and we focus too much on, who's going to success? Who's going to be the owner? So I think that's difficult. Most siblings have shared visions and values for the agency. With their upbringing and their background, their vision and values are very similar. So it's going to promote a cohesive work environment. And then you have communication. Communication also can be a good or a bad. Because how do siblings sometimes communicate? We fight. And not necessarily physical fight.
Or don't communicate at all.
Yes. Yes. And then that's poorly, unfortunately, that's in the world too. So siblings usually have effective communication skills because they build them over time. And those communication skills can enhance collaboration, problem solving, and decision making in the agency. But of course, it can also be a challenge. Synergy and complementary skills, they have different skill sets. Now, I have seen this firsthand. In the agency, there are several siblings that are leaders that take charge, build plans, and then there's other siblings who just are really good at sales and service and not good at the organizing and the planning. And it's hard because I think they need to recognize those strengths and their weaknesses, and they need to kind of allow the siblings that have the leadership organization strength skills, they need to allow them to lead. And I think you find that some of the ones who want to take over and succeed and be the agency owner actually are the ones that don't have the skills of being a leader and managing people. And I think that's something that they have to accept. And they have to say, okay, these siblings would be really good as leaders, organizers. Let's make them the lead. And I'll continue to use my strengths and sell and make the agency successful. What do you think about that with the different personalities?
Yeah, I think that is a super interesting point. And as I have gotten to know my family and, some of it has to do with checking your ego at the door too, right? So I'm sure my sister will never watch this, although maybe she will. And if she does, hello. But what I'll say is that, I have a brother and a sister here with me. And I think about if we were operating an agency together, my brother is great. He's really strong at IT. He manages a large manufacturing plant and all of their machines and technology and everything that runs through there. And, really smart in that way, great with people. My sister has a really big heart, but takes a lot of things very personally. Maybe wouldn't necessarily be a great manager. And then, I'm kind of in the middle of the two. My brother and I find it a lot easier not to take things so personally. Sometimes there is that twinge of jealousy that may come up in one or the other. And I look back at times in my life, and I got some really great advice one time about sometimes if you see something in someone else that maybe, you're not exactly drawn to, it's because maybe there's something in yourself that is very similar to that maybe you don't necessarily like. I think we have to be just very self-aware, and we have to be able to really communicate like you were talking about earlier and open up those lines of communication, because when we really start talking and communicating and embracing our strengths and our weaknesses, then that synergy starts to happen and we can really dive in and complement each other in our skill set.
For sure. And that kind of goes to the challenges, personal dynamics and conflict. If we don't self-reflect, like you mentioned, and we don't notice that something we don't like may actually be something we see in ourselves that we don't like, we tend to fight. And if it's with a sibling, it's easier to fight because that's what we're used to. We compete a lot. We argue a lot. We fight a lot. So when you're going into an agency, you need to make sure that you're maintaining professionalism and avoiding personal conflicts. And that's kind of hard for siblings because, they've dealt with conflict all their life with each other. So it's important for them to realize you have this family life, this conflict, this stuff that you've always done. Now you're in a professional environment in an agency, and you need to keep that professionalism and avoid conflict as much as possible. So they need to separate personal dynamics from the professional environment. And it evolves into them establishing boundaries and having difficulty establishing boundaries. Sometimes with siblings, we struggle with, establishing those boundaries to where, hey, this is work stuff and this is the boundary, but we kind of like, because we're siblings, all of it is our business because we're family, even
Right.
though it really all isn't our business just because we're family. So some of that stuff, we've got to learn how to use those boundaries. And with siblings, sometimes that's kind of hard because as growing up, we didn't have a lot of boundaries. We'd sneak into each other's rooms and and not have those boundaries. So there are consequences to not maintaining the appropriate boundaries, to not having those communication skills, and not being professional. And sometimes
Mhm.
there can be lack of objectivity, lean towards personal feelings instead of facts. So that was a huge one. The facts instead of feelings. A lot of time as insurance agents, we use feelings instead of facts. What have you seen out there with people using feelings instead of facts?
Well, I think that it's what we have in front of us. Sometimes people don't have the tools or the understanding to know how to get the facts. And I think that's important, right? Numbers don't have feelings. And so we really need to understand. And if we have identified a clear pathway, I kind of relate it to, and I know we're talking about siblings, but in general, as a family, when we think about relationships and when we're ending a relationship with someone, people tend to get very aggressive and now they want to destroy this person as opposed to remembering that we love these people. So just because we're not in a great space doesn't mean we need to destroy someone else and all of that time that we spent together. There was a reason why. And so we have to go back to, we care about these people, but we've set these clear, defined boundaries and job descriptions and roles. And so when it falls outside of that, then we need to be able to come back to the table and say, okay, now we need to redefine some things because maybe I'm not feeling comfortable about this. But again, that's a feeling. So what is the fact that then goes along with that? Maybe things are getting dropped. Maybe things are not going well. So I need to be able to come armed with, okay, we need to realign these roles and responsibilities because it's affecting the staff this way. Our retention numbers are not great. Our sales figures are not good. We need to have some facts that go along with that. I can't just say, Emily, I feel like you're a jerk today, so I'm going to do this thing.
Well, and it goes along with sibling rivalry. So it just goes right in,
That runs high at our house.
Yeah. And the comment you said, destroy someone.
Mm-hmm.
As siblings, sometimes we do that. We're like, oh no, they're not doing this. And instead of, working through it, we think, I'm going to destroy them. And because they're siblings and they have this sibling rivalry, it's easier, even though it should be harder because we're family, it tends to be easier. So we have to be careful of that, the unhealthy competition and the conflicts that are caused by, sibling rivalries. It can negatively impact, team morale and not just the family members, but the rest of the team that's on the agency as well.
The way you treat your partners, your siblings, and I want to call them business partners in this instance, right? Because even though they are your siblings, they're your business partner. And if your business partner was not your sibling, you have to step back and remember, would I treat a business partner that was not related to me in this way in front of my staff or around my staff, or let those personal things infect my agency? And the answer should be no.
And it usually is no, but do they stop to think about it before they do it? So they're basically reacting, and they're reacting the way they would react to a sibling instead of reacting to the way they act professionally to a coworker. That definitely, it triggered, all these thoughts, because with siblings, we've just got to keep those boundaries and the job descriptions. There's so much dynamic there. And it should be a time in our life where we're enjoying, and it's great. We are in a family owned business. We can be with the family, but it can also so much so be destroyed. So we get to the succession planning, there's challenges with the succession planning because everybody's competing. Everybody wants to be the owners of this agency. I mean, some do, some don't, but more do rather than don't. So we have to make sure
Well,
that we're very careful of that.
and I think that's important too. I've worked with some agencies where they're siblings and we're doing some succession planning. And I think it's important up front for the siblings to decide immediately what role they want to play in the agency. And if that is no role at all, then communicate that and then let it go
100%.
and let them go and do what they need to do to continue that legacy. But we really need to have a gut check. And again, we're going to go back to ego here and say, check it, right? If this is not about what did I get? What did they get? It's about, do you really want to be involved in the good and the bad that it's going to take to run this business? Because it's not just about the renewal contingencies hitting your bank account.
Yeah.
It's about the continued day-to-day operations of this business. So you have to be ready to make that decision when that time comes. How invested do you want to be? And if you don't want to be invested, then you have to let go and allow the others to do what they need to do.
Yeah. And I've seen in an agency where for instance, the CFO leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of hiring a true CFO, they put one of the family members in there, has no idea how to do it, is not a numbers person, and they're just winging it. So don't try to create a role for somebody just because they're family. They need to fit into that role, and that role needs to make sense, because you could end up damaging the agency because you're not putting people in the right role. You need to have open communication, collaborate to determine suitable roles. And I think that one's hard because I think some people think they should be in roles that they shouldn't be in, like somebody who's really good at sales and thinks that they're a really good leader, but they're not. But are we communicating that to them? And when we do communicate to them, how do we do it in an appropriate fashion where it doesn't offend them and destroy them?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. For example, my sister would probably love to manage the people, right? Because she loves to know all the business.
Yeah.
But again, she takes a lot of things very personally. And she's one of those people that would just immediately maybe react to something rather than taking the time to really analyze it and respond to a situation like that. So, if we were really looking at that, we would need to really be honest with ourselves and with her. And she's going to need to be honest with herself too about the fact that maybe that's not quite the role that I fit in. Because experience would be great, right? Because she has such a heart for people and would want to make sure that those things are taken care of and that our customers felt loved and cared for. And that would be something that she would be wonderful at.
And then we don't only just have the boundaries of like the personal boundaries that we need to have, but we also have the boundaries of work life and family life.
Yes.
In this particular agency, and if you guys are watching, I'm not going to go into details. I won't say any names. You guys know who I'm talking about. Mom doesn't work in the agency, and dad owns the agency and runs it with the siblings, and the kids each individually go back to mom about work. And that's got to be so hard for mom. I admire her, but at the same time, I think, how does she do that? Because that's got to be really hard. But then you also have like family events that you have. And you want to make sure that those events, anything that happens in those events, it doesn't spill over to the professional, the business. So you've got to separate those family events, make the family event. So Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, when you have those events, you've got to keep those family. You've got to keep the business out of it. You shouldn't be talking about business at those events because you will ruin those events for not just the immediate family, but all the other family. And I can't imagine the spouses.
Oh, yeah.
So when you go home and you vent to your spouse about the business stuff, and then you go to a family event, the only thing the spouse is thinking about is how that person treated their spouse in that professional environment.
Yeah.
So you have to be really, really careful to kind of keep the family stuff family because you don't want to lose those relationships. It's not worth it to lose those relationships. And then the business stuff, you've got to keep it at the business.
Well, and I think that's a great point, Therese, because if I go home and I tell my spouse about, what my sister did or what my brother did, then it starts to infect them and their attitude
Yep.
to the rest of the group, right? It changes that whole group dynamic quite a lot. So you have to be really careful about that. And that's because your partner, your spouse, they love you and they want to protect you, right? And so they're going to become defensive on your behalf and may feel like they need to stand up for you or they want to be on your side. But why are we making people pick sides? We have to stop that immediately. We need to keep our business at the business, keep our agency in the agency. When you close and lock that door at night, go home, love your kids, love your family, love everybody around, love your pet. Take time for yourself because that time is limited and it's short. And you spend more days probably sitting inside your agency or working on your agency than you do with your family. And so you need to defend that time.
I'm going to move down to resolving conflicts effectively because we need to encourage open and respectful communication when conflicts arise.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about a situation and I was like, if my brother and I worked in an agency and we were to get into an argument, if we were to go back to when we were like young, like teenagers, I mean, we actually got physical altercation. That is something that cannot happen. I cannot. Can you imagine? I mean, there was a situation where I've heard of siblings like physically fighting at the office. And I'm like, that is just, you can't do that because if that was a coworker, you guys would both get fired.
Absolutely.
You have to realize you're grown up. You're not 5, you're not 10, you're not 12. You are an adult and you need to communicate respectfully when conflict arises, implement conflict resolution strategies across the agency, texting. For instance, the siblings would check back and forth when they get upset with each other. And they do it through a professional channel for the agency instead of, so you've got to find that boundary. If they're going to be chatting back and forth, like chit for chat, going back and forth in the chat, it amplifies it. And because it's in chat and you're not communicating verbally, there's other tones and other assumptions that get in there. So people get their feelings hurt over assumptions and things in text that wouldn't happen if they were communicating in person. So if you're working remote, this is even harder. So when you have meetings, when you come together at the office, you need to make sure that you guys are implementing conflict resolution strategies. And you have to do these with professional behaviors and avoidance of physical altercations. Physical altercations is never, ever, ever okay in any kind of business setting, unless you're an MMA fighter. If you work for MMA, then hey,
right. That's your job. But other than that, no way. I kind of like the idea of, I like to set a time limit. Maybe I'm with a sibling and we're running a business together and we're in a hot and heavy dispute. We need to do that in person or on a call, on a video call where we can see one another and actually use our words, and then set a time limit to that, depending upon the severity of what is going on. Say, okay, we're going to talk about this for an hour. We're going to set a timer. And at an hour, we're either going to have it resolved or we're going to take a break. And then we're going to come back, because that then allows you to have that information sink in, right? We need to have that time to sit with those things, because when we initially hear things about ourselves, we put on that armor and we start to defend ourselves. And it becomes a situation where now we're just going back and forth. But maybe if you use a strategy like setting a time limit on that, where you can just, let's go our separate ways, let's come back, and now let's reset the timer for another hour if we need to get through some more things. But we need to have that time.
Right. And just because we're siblings does not mean that we can also take advantage of other people's time. Because that's another thing I noticed when they have meetings, you start getting into arguments and then they start not looking at time and just keep going and keep going and keep going. I think at that point is when they need to say, okay, we're taking a break. We're taking 5. and then we'll come back and we'll get back into this conversation. But this is not where this conversation is heading.
And it may mean you have to meet the next day, right?
Right. Yeah.
The next day. Like you still have to be respectful of your time, of your business, of your employees, of your clients. Make a commitment to do that with one another. And if you set the rules of engagement at the beginning, everybody knows what to expect. We're either going to have a resolution by the end of this meeting, or we're going to set another meeting to come to a resolution at a future time.
Right. And we're going to respect everybody's time in doing that. So in summary, basically, we talk about the challenges, the benefits and the challenges working with siblings, the importance of establishing ground rules, open communication, and maintaining professionalism. That's important. We encourage listeners to seek professional assistance if needed, to offer resources for further support. So if you're having trouble personally, go out and get, have therapy. People always, look down at therapy, but, just talking to somebody else neutral outside of the situation may also be helpful. So that's what we think about working with siblings in an insurance agency. Feel free to reach out to us, Therese at agencyperformancepartners.com and Bobby at agencyperformancepartners.com, or you can just go to our website and find all of our information there. Thanks for joining us for today's podcast about working in an insurance agency with siblings. We appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Have a good one.